Ecuador is a beautiful country in South America. It is located on the west coast of the continent, right on the equator line. This is why the country is named Ecuador, which means equator in Spanish. To the north is Colombia, to the east and south is Peru. The Pacific Ocean is on its west side. Ecuador is not a very large country. It has many different kinds of places. It has tall mountains called the Andes, a hot and wet rainforest called the Amazon, a warm coast with beaches, the famous Galapagos Islands far out in the ocean. These islands have special animals that are not found anywhere else in the world. The people of Ecuador are a mix of many groups. Many people have ancestors from indigenous groups. Many others have ancestors from Spain. There are also many people with African ancestors, especially near the coast. This mix makes Ecuador's culture very rich and interesting. They speak Spanish. Many people also speak native languages like Quechua. The country is known for its friendly people, its colorful markets, and its delicious food. This essay will tell the story of Ecuador for the last 100 years, from 1925 to 2025. It is a story with many changes. There were times of trouble, and times of success. We will learn about the important people who led the country. These leaders, both men and women, made big decisions that affected everyone. We will see how Ecuador changed from selling agricultural products like cacao to a country that found a lot of oil. This story shows how the people of Ecuador have worked hard to build their nation through many challenges. Understanding this history helps us understand the Ecuador of today. The year 1925 was a very important year for Ecuador. It was the start of a big change called the July Revolution. At that time, the country was controlled by rich bankers, owners of large cacao plantations. A group of young military officers did not like this. They said the government was unfair to poor people. In July 1925, they took control quietly, without a big fight. One key figure was Isidro Ayora. He became provisional president in 1926. Ayora was a doctor who aimed to reorganize the state. He created the Central Bank of Ecuador, the Banco Central del Ecuador. That helped control the country's money. Before this, private banks had too much power. Ayora also passed new laws and set up new government offices to serve all people. The changes were significant, but hard times followed. The 1940s began with a very sad and difficult event for Ecuador. In 1941, a war started between Ecuador and its neighbor Peru. The two countries had a long disagreement about where their border was, especially in the Amazon rainforest area. The war was short but very painful for Ecuador. The Ecuadorian army was smaller and not as well equipped as the Peruvian army. Peru took control of a large area of land that Ecuador believed was its own territory. A time of great national sadness and anger for the Ecuadorian people. Because of the war, Ecuador had to sign a treaty in 1942. It was called the Rio de Janeiro Protocol, signed with help from the United States, signed with help from Brazil, signed with help from Argentina, signed with help from Chile. The treaty officially gave a large piece of the Amazon territory to Peru. The president then, Carlos Arroyo del Rio, was blamed for the loss. Many Ecuadorians were very unhappy with him and the government. The unhappiness led to a big change in 1944. This was called the May Revolution, or La Gloriosa. People were tired of the old politicians and the war's results. They protested in the streets and the military supported them. President Arroyo del Rio was forced to leave office. José María Velasco Ibarra returned to power. He was very popular. People saw him as a new hope. This was his second time as president. The 1950s in Ecuador are often called the banana boom. During this time, Ecuador became the #1 exporter of bananas in the whole world. The country's warm coast was perfect for growing them. This was very good for Ecuador's economy. Many people found work on banana plantations. The country earned a lot of money selling bananas to the United States, Europe. This new wealth helped the government build more roads, schools, hospitals. The banana boom changed the economy of Ecuador, moving it away from cacao, making it dependent on bananas for its income. Despite the economic success from bananas, politics in Ecuador remained very unstable. The most important political figure of this decade was again José María Velasco Ibarra. He was elected president for a third time in 1952. He was known for his powerful speeches and his connection with the common people. He would famously say, "Give me a balcony, and I will become president." He started many public works projects, using the money from the banana boom to build infrastructure. He was very popular, but his style of governing often led to clashes with other political groups and the military. Another important leader from this period was Camilo Ponce Enríquez. who was elected president in 1956. He was different from Velasco Ibarra because he was from the Social Christian Party, which was more conservative. The 1960s started with José María Velasco Ibarra as president for the fourth time. However, his presidency did not last long. The country faced economic problems, and his government struggled to manage them. In 1961, the military forced him out of power. His vice president, Carlos Julio Arosemena Monroy, took over. He also struggled as president. In 1963, the military removed him. They formed a military junta. They said they needed to restore order. They said they must stop the influence of communism during the Cold War. The junta ruled from 1963 to 1966. They tried big changes. They launched land reform. The program aimed to give land to poor farmers. Previously, most land belonged to a few very rich families. The junta wanted to modernize the country, but their rule was not democratic. They limited political freedoms. Citizens and parties demanded a return to civilian rule. After 1966, Ecuador faced political uncertainty. In 1968, Velasco Ibarra was elected a fifth and final time. It was a record. His term was full of crisis. In 1970, he took special powers and ruled as a dictator. In 1972, as huge oil reserves were found, the military removed him again. General Guillermo Rodriguez Lara then led a long period of military rule. Ecuador became a major oil exporter under his government. Oil money funded projects, roads, power plants, and other big projects. But people wanted democracy back. A plan to return to civilian rule was made. A new constitution was written and approved by popular vote. In 1979, elections were held. Jaime Roldos Aguilera, a young charismatic lawyer, won the presidency. The new era of democracy began with great hope. President Jaime Roldos Aguilera was young and popular. He promised to focus on human rights and social justice. He had a famous slogan, "This democracy that we are building, a democracy for the people, not for the powerful." He was seen as a modern and fresh start. Martha Bucaram was seen as a modern and fresh start. However, this hope was tragically cut short. In 1981, President Roldos Martha Bucaram, the Minister of Defense, died in a plane crash in the south of Ecuador. The entire nation was in shock and mourning. His vice president, Osvaldo Hurtado Larrea, became president. President Hurtado had to lead the country during a very difficult time. The price of oil, Ecuador's main source of income, started to fall. The country owed a lot of money to foreign banks. This was the beginning of a serious debt crisis that affected many countries in Latin America. President Hurtado had to make some very tough and unpopular decisions to manage the economy. He had to cut government spending. He had to control prices. These measures were necessary, but they made life harder for many Ecuadorians, and there were many protests against his government. In 1984, Ecuador elected León Febres Cordero. He had a very different style from Hurtado. Febres Cordero was a businessman. He was a conservative politician. He promised to be tough on crime and to open the economy to more private business and foreign investment. His presidency was marked by a strong confrontational style. He had many conflicts with the Congress and the judicial system. He also faced a major crisis when an Air Force general briefly kidnapped him in 1987 to demand the release of another officer. The end of the 1980s saw the election of Rodrigo Borja Ceballos in 1988. He was from a center-left party and represented another change in political direction. Borja's government tried to bring more social programs and also worked to respect human rights. He had to continue dealing with the difficult economic situation left by the debt crisis and low oil prices. The 1990s were a decade of intense political and social conflict in Ecuador. The decade began with a very important event in 1990, the first major national uprising of indigenous peoples. Led by the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, or CONAI, thousands of indigenous people marched and blocked roads to demand rights for their land and culture. They wanted the government to recognize that Ecuador was a plurinational country, meaning it was made up of many different nations and peoples. This uprising was a powerful moment that made the indigenous movement a very important political force in the country for the first time. The political situation was very unstable. In 1992, Sixto Duran Ballon was elected president. An architect, his government focused on modernizing the state and privatizing public companies. However, his vice president Alberto Dahic had to flee the country because of a corruption scandal. Then, in 1995, a short but intense border war broke out with Peru again. This conflict happened in the Cenepa River Valley. Unlike the war in 1941, the Ecuadorian army fought very well, and the war ended with a sense of national pride. The instability continued with the election of Abdallah Bucaram in 1996. He was a very eccentric and populist leader who called himself El Loco, or the Crazy One. He promised to help the poor, but his government was quickly accused of widespread corruption. After only 6 months in office, massive protests erupted across the country against his government. In February 1997, the National Congress voted to remove him from office, declaring him mentally unfit to rule. This created a constitutional crisis because 3 different people claimed to be the president at the same time. After Bucaram's removal, Fabian Alarcon served as an interim president. Then in 1998, Jamil Mahuad was elected. His presidency is remembered for 2 huge events. First, in 1998, he signed a historic and final peace treaty with Peru's president, Alberto Fujimori. But his second major act was very controversial. In 1999, Ecuador faced a terrible banking crisis and hyperinflation. The year 2000 began with President Jamil Mahuad being forced out of office by protests led by indigenous groups and some military colonels. One of those colonels was Lucio Gutierrez. After a brief period of instability, the vice president, Gustavo Noboa, took power. His main job was to manage the country's transition to using the US dollar as its official currency. This was a very difficult process. Many people lost their savings because of the bad exchange rate. However, dollarization did succeed in stopping the hyperinflation that had been destroying the economy. In 2002, Lucio Gutierrez, the same army colonel from the 2000 protests, was elected president. He presented himself as a man of the people and an outsider. He formed alliances with indigenous parties, left-wing parties. However, once in office, he made policies that were more friendly to the United States and international financial organizations. This angered his former supporters. His government became very unpopular, and he was also accused of interfering with the Supreme Court. In April 2005, after huge street protests in Quito known as the Forajido Rebellion, he was also forced to abandon the presidency, continuing the cycle of political instability. This period of instability finally ended with the election of Rafael Correa in late 2006. He was an economist who promised a citizen revolution. He said he would fight against the old, corrupt political parties and use the country's oil money to help the poor. Correa was a very strong and charismatic leader, and he became extremely popular. One of his first actions was to call for a constituent assembly to write a new constitution. The new constitution was approved in 2008 and gave more power to the state, included rights for nature, and allowed for presidents to be re-elected. Rafael Correa's presidency lasted for 10 years, from 2007 to 2017. During this time, oil prices were high, and his government invested billions of dollars in public works. They built modern highways, large hydroelectric dams, new schools, hospitals all across the country. Poverty and inequality were significantly reduced. Correa was a very dominant figure who had many fights with the media and his political opponents. He was re-elected easily in 2009 and again in 2013. His long and impactful presidency completely changed the political and physical landscape of Ecuador, leaving a powerful but controversial legacy. In 2017, the era of Rafael Correa came to an end. His chosen successor, Lenin Moreno, won the presidential election. Moreno had been Correa's vice president for many years. At first, everyone expected him to continue Correa's policies. However, soon after taking office, Moreno started to move in a very different direction. He began to criticize Correa, accused his government of corruption, and said they left a large national debt. This created a deep and bitter political split. The 2 men became fierce enemies. Moreno's government began undoing Correa's policies and moved closer to the United States. Moreno's term faced major challenges. In October 2019, his government ended fuel subsidies, gasoline prices jumped, diesel prices jumped. Massive and violent protests erupted across the country, led by the indigenous movement CONE. The protests paralyzed the country for nearly 2 weeks. Moreno temporarily moved the government from Quito to Guayaquil. Eventually, the measure was cancelled. In 2020, Ecuador was hit hard by the global COVID-19 pandemic. Guayaquil suffered a severe health crisis. In 2021, Ecuador elected Guillermo Lasso as president, a conservative banker who had run twice before. His government pushed a different economic plan. He prioritized attracting foreign investment, promoting free trade, and managing the national debt. One big success: a very fast, effective COVID-19 vaccination campaign, vaccinating millions in a few months. Yet his presidency faced serious challenges. Violent crime rose linked to drug trafficking, and the National Assembly strongly opposed many measures, making lawmaking difficult. As we look to 2025, Ecuador continues on a path of change. After extreme political crisis and rising violence, new leadership now faces old and new problems. The country must handle economic difficulties, social inequality, and serious security threats. Over the last 100 years, from the revolution of 1925 to today, Ecuador has shown resilience. Its people have fought for their rights, for democracy, and for a more just society. Ecuador's story is one of struggle, but also of vibrant culture and a determined people building their future at the middle of the world.